Hi, Bob. Well, welcome everyone. We're just waiting for Wendy to arrive.
Hey, Prash. Hey there. I will start this in a minute. I just want to make sure I'm recording it, and I don't see the recording link.
Folks, we have a couple of technical issues. Bear with us. Wendy's just getting things underway. It's her first time using StreamYard, so thanks for your patience. Here she comes again. Wendy, we're live.
I know. For some reason, I have a bit of an echo. I don't.
You just need to make sure that the speaker is turned off on your computer. Just make sure make sure your speaker's not active at the same time.
Just a minute.
Wendy, you probably have two microphones on.
Just a second. Let me turn something else off.
Folks, thanks for your patience. These are some of the things that happen with real-time stuff. So do bear with us. Thanks for your patience, guys. We're going to have some good conversation, but just do bear with us while we sort out the tech. Thank you.
Hi there. Hopefully this is, can you hear me?
This is good.
Okay, ready.
We are good to go. So over to you, Wendy, to make the introductions, my lovely, because we're rolling live already.
Okay, awesome.
And did you hit the record button?
There's no place to hit a record button on here. It says, just says end broadcast.
Okay.
So I think it's automatically records.
Hopefully Barbara can, yeah, no problem. Otherwise Barbara can join.
All right, great.
Okay, we're in.
All right, fantastic. A few hiccups because this is my first one. And I want to say good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody who's here live and to those watching later. And I'm so excited. And before I go on and introduce my special guest, why don't you take a moment, those of you attending, to go into chat and say hello and let me know where you're from. And for some reason, even though we're live, I don't know, a number of people were supposed to attend, and I don't know why they're not here.
We are live and rocking and rolling at the moment. And we have 10 viewers at the moment, so.
Oh, okay. Well, if the 10 viewers would take a second to go on and introduce yourself and let me know where you're from. Somebody said she doesn't see the chat option. Prash, where do people go to see the chat option?
Oh, they just literally type inside the LinkedIn chat. It's just fine. Just in the LinkedIn chat for the LinkedIn Live, you'll be able to ask any questions. If you're watching it live on LinkedIn, you can just put things in the comments section. That's what we mean. When we say chat, we actually mean the comments section of LinkedIn. That's all we're doing. So that's all we need to do here, folks. Just leave your comments in LinkedIn or Facebook, wherever you're tuned in from, and let's have some fun.
All right, terrific. I see a few of my supporters, friends are here, so thrilled about that. And I'm very excited today because this is my very first LinkedIn Live and
Bravo.
my first renewal and the debut of Renewal at 50 Plus. And if I'm honest, I want to tell you that this past year, I was kind of a mess. I was in a funk. I was frozen in place. I couldn't move forward. And I think a lot of the problem looking back was that I was reinventing myself. I was pivoting from my old established career as a PR and marketing expert and becoming a reinvention and personal branding coach for people 50 plus. And to be honest, I was scared. I was terrified to move and get out of my comfort zone. And instead of moving forward, I just was like a rock, didn't move. But finally, at the end of 2020, I said to myself, enough sabotage, enough staying in place, and I was going to make a difference. And I decided for my word of the year for 2020, it would be renewal. And I created this show, Renewal at 50 Plus, to be a wake-up call, both for me and for you, especially for people 50 plus and even 40 plus who want to live their best lives now. Every month, I'm going to be sitting down with a special guest, and we're going to have an interactive and lively conversation. And I promise you it'll be enlightening, inspirational, motivational, and even entertaining. And I'm so pleased today as my first guest to have Prash Kotecha. And I'm so excited about Prash being here. We only met recently. Prash was nice enough to reach out to me on LinkedIn where we got connected. Thank you, Prash, for doing that.
You're welcome.
And Prash is based in London, and he's a wellness and motivational and stress management, leadership, productivity, and spirituality expert all wrapped into one. He also has an awesome podcast. I urge you to check it out, called Urban Spirituality. Prash, why don't you share a little bit more about yourself, and welcome, Prash.
Thank you so much, Wendy. What a wonderful, wonderful and gracious introduction. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And yes, I'm delighted to be here. Hello, everybody. My name is Prash Kotecha. As Wendy says, I've been based in London for just under 50 years. So so kind of showing my age, or maybe hopefully not showing my age. But I've lived in London for nearly 5 decades, half a century. And originally I'm from India. I have Indian blood, Indian origins. And it's been an a very interesting time growing up in London in the 1970s, where unfortunately racism and bullying and other things were a feature of people who are not normally seen to be of a different color. So it was very different times in those days. But I've had the privilege of living in London and experiencing a wonderful life with all the suffering and trappings of poverty, death, so many challenges, that it's allowed me to reinvent. And I know this is a big theme for you here, Wendy, and for your audiences, to be able to reinvent and pivot my life in a way where I can serve and inspire and empower people on their own journeys wherever they are in the world. And that just led me through 3 decades of corporate life in London and internationally, traveling with some banks, JP Morgan, HSBC, various corporates, and technology and business transformation, while at night, so to speak, doing my side hustle as a coach and an expert in training and helping people with the stuff inside here, the mindset stuff, which I feel has been so important and so neglected. And that then has now become my full-time thing, of course. And these days I parade as a one-on-one and group coach and trainer in the areas, as you rightly say, of well-being, emotional intelligence, personal development, especially conscious leadership, and how those things synthesize together to bring about success and fulfillment in people's lives, no matter who or where
Terrific, terrific, Prash. Thank you for that introduction. And I thought we would start it off because our topic today is turning a crisis into an opportunity to talk exactly about that. And maybe you could share an example or two from your practice or your own life on how you've turned a crisis into something positive. And I think often an example makes it real.
Thank you, Wendy. I think that's so important. For me, I've had a number of times in my life where I've faced such crises. One such time was during the 80s, where we were still finding our feet, and financially times were very, very difficult. We came to the UK with nothing in the early 1970s. And so we lived in poverty, many of us in one small place. And so we had to fight poverty. And at the time, I sadly lost my mother, my grandfather, and my grandmother all in a period of 2 years. So our family went from five, including my grandmom and granddad, down to just my brother, my dad, and myself. And in those 2 years, not only did we lose, my mother, I was only 13. Not only did we lose my mom, my grandmom, and my granddad, but we also, unfortunately, my dad turned to alcoholism, and he was already drinking, and he turned into a serious state of alcohol abuse, gambling, and huge amounts of debt. So that, I guess, by all accounts, was a pretty bad crisis. That was following bullying and physical abuse when I was younger. So it was challenging, to say the least. And that really spiraled me into a negative situation. And a 13-year-old, 14-year-old chap, it isn't equipped with all the wisdom of the world. And so the thing for me to do was to take my anger out on anything or anyone. And I joined a gang in London, scrapping here. I think you call it scrapping, fighting, getting angry, hating God, and every other sort of hating, negative thing, rebellious thing that I could do. And it was a very interesting time when I was in London one night, probably inebriated, having drunk it well underage, under 16, drowning my sorrows, trying to avoid an old man who would swear and abuse me. And a monk stopped me in the street. And, he attempted to have a conversation with this drunken teenager. But he said something that was very profound. He says, do you realize that this life is just like that? It's a blink of an eye. And do you realize that you will never be happy if you're chasing external pursuits? Your happiness can only come from inside you. And I said, well, what do you know? I lost my mom and this happened. I laid into the guy. I needed somebody to lay into. And he said to me, he goes, well, your mom's a spiritual being. She's not gone. She's just left the physical form. Do you have a car? I said, yeah, well, we're saving up for a car. Well, what happens when your car gets old and worn out or smashed or in an accident? What do you do? I said, well, I get another car. He goes, well, that's what your mom's done. Your mom's body was not suitable. Her time was up. She's just changed carriages. She's just changed to another vehicle. And that hit me in the middle of famous Oxford Street in the West End of London, how profoundly this random stranger, a monk, could make an impact on me, more so than any family member or anyone else had done.
That reminds me, Prash, about something serendipitous like that. I often share with people, Prash, a story that I actually opened my book, Thriving at 50 Plus, with. It's about an executive, Nicholas Bobbin, who at the time was 50, had an amazing career, traveled all over the world. And at 50, he was crossing a street and ended up having an horrific car accident. Just about every part of his body was injured. And he was in the hospital for about a year. And he, at one point, just wanted to throw it all in. He wanted to kill himself. And he remembered, sort of like your monk, something restored his spirit. He remembered something somebody had said to him, which was to fall down 7 times, get up 8. And that reminded himself that he could pick himself up by the bootstraps. And he actually ended up reinventing himself opened his own very successful today consulting company and feels so much better. In fact, he said to me, you know, I'm really happy I had that car accident, because without that horrific crisis, he doesn't think that he would have changed his life, and his life changed for the better. And the reason I love to tell this story, Prash, is that it's a reminder that we can have, if these people and yourself can have horrific, horrible, devastating crises and yet survive, revive, change, and grow, that certainly the everyday struggles that we have, we too can surmount and change. What I'd love to hear you talk about a little bit, Prash, is the importance of having a growth mindset. And by a growth mindset, I know you know, but just so everybody's on the same page, I'm talking about the idea that your skills, your intelligence even, are not fixed, that change is possible. So and I think that's so vital to overcoming a crisis. Maybe you could share a little bit about that, Prash.
Of course, Wendy. Well, the growth mindset is something that sometimes happens it always happens usually through some sort of stimulus or trigger. And that trigger could be internal or it could be external. For some people, it's an internal trigger where they feel a desire, almost like a spontaneous desire to be better, to do better, to accomplish more. And sometimes it's an external trigger. For me, for example, in my life, seeing my father, an alcoholic and a gambling person who was a good man at heart, but who was misled and who had these habits that controlled him rather than, him controlling them. That was the external trigger. That was the stimulus that I needed to ignite my desire for personal growth. And so therefore, as a listener on this fantastic episode here, ask yourself, I would urge you to ask yourself, what trigger have you had in your life that has made a profound impact in the direction that you've taken? And when you start to do that little bit of forensic work, look back and see where you made that trigger, and don't limit yourself to your adult years. Look back at your younger years as well. What trigger, what external or internal trigger or incident or happenstance or moment or flash of brilliance caused that spark for that growth? Then you can start to use that as fuel to reignite growth in a new area that you have in your life. Look for the triggers to ignite that spark. When the spark is started, the growth has a chance to start to occur. And then, of course, it can exponentially increase.
Yes, I really like that idea about looking for the spark, Prash. And it kind of reminds me actually of an experience that I had myself in terms of writing my book, which came out about a year ago. And I had not even really thought about writing a book.
Right.
And what happened is that a professor at Georgetown University I had connected with on LinkedIn reached out to me, and he asked me if I knew anyone who might want to join a book writing program. And he asked if I knew any recent graduates. Right. Well, I'm not quite a recent graduate, but I asked him if he would consider a, quote, mature student. And the next thing I knew, I was in this book writing program and ended up writing a book. And that was really the spark that I needed, because I think in the back of my mind, I actually did want to write a book. I just hadn't had that spark I needed. Yeah. And that made all the difference in the world. So I love what you were talking about. The other thing that I think is so important, and I know you do too, with surmounting a crisis, is using emotional intelligence. And I know you're a real expert in that. And why don't you explain a little bit about what we mean when we say emotional intelligence and why it can be so helpful in this regard?
Of course, Wendy. So let's talk about the more well-known type of intelligence, which is the intellectual quotient, or IQ. So most of us are familiar with the term or notion of IQ, the intellectual quotient, and it's a measure, or it is a gauge of a person's intellectual capabilities, their ability to be able to be very task-centric, assimilate knowledge, use their rational abilities, and so forth. The EQ is the emotional quotient, or EI, as some people call it, and therefore it's the counterpart, it's the emotional counterpart. It is saying that the IQ focuses very much on our rational side. The EQ looks at our limbic system, it's our emotions, it dictates and covers how we show up in the world for other people and how we show up for ourselves. And therefore, typically, emotional intelligence looks at, broadly speaking, several important categories: managing our own emotions, managing our own behavior, becoming more self-aware, managing our relationships with other people, and managing the way we interact socially. So these are some of the key categories of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, therefore, also covers the tools and the skills to build our resilience, our internal resilience, our personal resilience, the way we can handle situations better, how good we are as a listener, active listening, empathy, all these beautiful qualities that a conscious leader, if you're a leader or an owner in your business, these are the hallmarks of a modern leader who is able to be heart-centric and intellect-led. That beautiful balance, Wendy, I would say, between IQ and EQ. And that's something that as children, we're not taught. What university or high school is teaching people EQ? They're so busy teaching people how to be strong with their IQ, but who's teaching emotional intelligence? How to show up, how to not be a snowflake, how to not feel like you're one of these people who's self-entitled and thinks the world should be giving it to you on a platter. All of this is EQ, and it should be taught at a young age.
Yes,
that's my thing. I'm getting a bit passionate about it because this is what we should be teaching our future generations.
Yes, it's very, very true. And I certainly could have used a strong dose of that growing up. And I want to talk a little bit about something that I've been thinking about. I've been reading a very good book by Bruce Feiler called In the Transitions. And what he talks about is the fact that life is, as we know, is full of transitions. And at the same time, we're taught that we should be on an upward trajectory all the time, when in fact, that's not the case. And I'm sure in your life, and I know in mine, you have the ups, you have the downs. And what gets you through that is what you were talking about, having resilience, being able to realize that life is not necessarily, it's not perfect, but that you can overcome those down periods. And what researchers actually have discovered is that families where children have had and experienced those ups and downs, but the family had a narrative where they were able to make it not depressing, but talk about the resilience and overcoming what happens. And they found that those children were the most successful and the happiest. And I think that's true with just what we're talking about now, that
it's about being resilient, facing interruptions and disruptions sometimes on a live broadcast. It's all resilience. It's rolling with the punches, right?
Oh, yes.
Let's folks, for those of you who are feeling and leaning into what Wendy and I are talking about, whilst Wendy shared a nice book reference there, let me throw one in there as well. Angela Duckworth, Grit, a book called Grit, Grit, by Angela Lee Duckworth. Fantastic book on how one cultivates personal resilience, how one shows up, how one learns to cultivate dignity. And let's just, if you don't mind, Wendy, let me add in this theme of dignity here as when we're talking about a crisis, because in a crisis, a person's character is revealed. We all know this. And a person's got all the good and bad aspects, the colors of our character become evident during a crisis. So I think one of the qualities to aspire for whilst overcoming a crisis is dignity. Learning to have dignity and self-respect for oneself and for those people around us. To be able to preserve those values of dignity is a powerful way to help to overcome the crisis. That is to say, too many of us in the middle of a crisis are focused on the nuts and bolts of the crisis. And of course, if our house is on fire, we have to put the fire out, no doubt. Yeah. But to be entirely or mainly focused on the crisis means that you're losing sight of the bigger picture. And sometimes what we think is a crisis is actually a blessing in disguise, or becomes a blessing. Wendy, I don't know, your thoughts on this? You've experienced, I'm sure.
Yes, I have certainly experienced the fact that you think you're drowning and things are not going the way you want them to. And in a sense, that experience is something that you just have to go through. It's sort of like what I was talking about in the beginning, about how I felt this past year. I was really down in the dumps, and yet I know I needed to go through that to get to the other side. And I think oftentimes, Prash, people feel that they can just bury those bad feelings, just move on. But you really need to give yourself permission to experience that so that you're able to absorb it. And that's really the only way you can move on. Otherwise, it comes back to bite you afterwards. One thing that I think would be very good to talk about, Prash, on the same note, is storytelling. And that's a real favorite of mine. And by storytelling, I mean coming up with your personal narrative that incorporates both what you were, where you are, and what you're going to be. Sometimes when people tell their own life story, they get so focused sometimes on the negative, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, Prakash?
Absolutely. And, such an important part of our life. I note that there's a question that's come in as well, which I'm sure we'll come to. What are a few tips to work through a crisis, especially when you have no one to talk it through with? Hold that thought. Wendy, we'll come back to that question, shall we?
Sure.
Okay. So let's talk about stories, because this is powerful. So let's just say this. Everyone has a story. Let's just be real for a second. Everybody has a story. Everybody may not want to tell their story, but everybody has a story, right? And that story can either make your life or it can own you and take over your life. I'll say that again. Your story can define you or it can control you. So there's a big difference between knowing your story, owning your story, or being owned by your story. Unfortunately, a lot of people are living their lives being owned and ruled by their story. And now let me just throw this in from my training in the subconscious mind. It's one of the areas that I coach in and train in. The subconscious mind is dictating 90% of our waking thoughts, decisions, behaviors, activities, the whole lot. 90% is the subconscious. We think that we're in charge, but it's the subconscious that's running the show. Yeah. Now, that's not me. That's research back. Now, this is interesting. If 90% of what's happening in our day is from the subconscious, where do you think the subconscious got its programming? I'll tell you where. From our story. And where did the story come from? The stuff that happened to us that we then interpreted, right? Something happened. We interpreted it in some particular way. We gave it a meaning and a feeling. That went into our conscious, then our subconscious, and now we're running that story. That story is running our lives. I'm a loser. I'll never be able to find love in my life. I'm never going to be successful at business. That teacher who said you'll never amount to any much, you're a useless kid. So for my whole life now, I'm going to be nothing. I'm no good for business. I'm no good for success. I'll never make it over here. I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful enough. I'm not smart enough. All of these are projections, usually grossly exaggerated, let me add. These are projections that we've placed upon ourselves due to our story. So coming to your point, Wendy, we first need to get real and understand that we have a story. We are not our story. We have a story. Once we separate our story from ourselves, we're able to start to take control of what has happened. And that way we change from our story owning us to first becoming aware that we have a story, we have a past. We suffered whatever we suffered in our lives, but that's a story we've been through. Now, once we own that story, after becoming aware of it, we can now start to rewrite what the rest of our journey looks like. That's the power of storytelling.
Yes, I really like that, Prash, about not having your story own you, but having you own your story. That's really a helpful way to look at it. The other thing that I want to mention before we go on to the Q&A, because I see from the time that we're getting close to that, is that you don't need to think of it as one story, but no. We all have multiple stories. So, and you might tell one story to one group of people, have another for a different group, and have them in your back pocket. That way you truly do have control, as Prash was saying, over your stories. They're not controlling you. So I've really so much enjoyed our conversation, Prash. You're always wonderful to talk with. And why don't we open it up now to some Q&A. And let me, I put up this little banner here that people can see, because I love talking about storytelling and would love if somebody's interested to do a free 20-minute call with you regarding that. But let me go back and we'll go back to the comments and see if we have any questions.
Of course.
I also, by the way, put in the comments the full name of the book that I was talking about. You might want to do the same with yours, Prash.
I'm just doing that, and I have something special for the audiences anyway, so I'll be sharing that momentarily.
All right. Let me just pull up the area where I have the questions. Okay, here's one question. What are a few tips to work through a crisis, especially when you have no one to talk it through with? Maybe you can take that, Prash.
I can. Sure. And actually, Wendy, you've half answered that very beautifully already during our conversation. Do you remember, folks, when Wendy said a little while ago about the need to not run away from what we're feeling, but lean into it? This is a major point. When we reach out to people to seek support in a crisis, that's great. But if we haven't processed the emotion ourselves, reaching out to other people is just like a Band-Aid. It doesn't solve the problem. What we want to do is lean into the emotion. Now, I know that's hard. Nobody said it's going to be easy sitting there, but we live in a culture and a society in the Western world where we are programmed to be distracted. We're seeking dopamine. We want to press that phone and get the little likes on our Facebook. We want to go get the thank yous and the comments. We want to be distracted when we're upset and we've had a fight. We want to turn on the TV, reach for that six-pack, have a beer, or in my case, get drunk. Whatever it is, we're a distraction nation, whether it's the UK or the USA, wherever we are. We need to recognize that when a negative emotion or crisis is occurring, distraction is not the answer. We need to sometimes sit with the emotion. Now, that's painful. When you sit with emotion and you try to identify, and this is the tip I'm giving, sit with the emotion, breathe for a minute or two, just breathe deeply, and try to identify where in your body you're feeling that emotion. Where in your body you're feeling that emotion. Now, when you do that, something magical happens. You know what that is? There's a slight gap created between the feelings and the intensity that you have and your ability to actually process them. That's where the magic happens. By focusing on where it is in your body and then leaning into that, feeling it where it is, you've created a state break, what we call in neuroscience, there's a state break. Now, when you've created a state break, you're able to shift your situation from a reaction mode to a response mode. You're able to come at it with less emotion, more calm, and more focus. And it's like a muscle. The more frequently we lean into these negative emotions, the more frequently we sit with the crisis and breathe into that feeling and sit there and I recognize where it feels, we start to find these little drops of wisdom that start to give us the answer to come out of the crisis. But that doesn't happen if we distract ourselves constantly.
Oh, yes, that's so helpful. And that actually leads into another question that Lisa Wozniak had. How long does it take to make that mind shift in the wake of a tragedy so that you're not owned by it? What's been your experience in terms of time?
That's an excellent question. Lisa, look, folks, I've been working with people for over 20 years in the coaching, mentoring space. I've seen people make a shift in minutes on a session together because a penny's dropped for them, because they took the time to break their state and go into the state of presence, pure presence, and no actions. And for some people, it may take hours, days, or weeks. So there isn't a specific amount of time, but this is the more important point. If we don't make it self-aware, that is conscious, that we have a situation that, you know, our emotions are controlling us, we're in this state. B, identifying where it is, so we become mindful. So we've gone self-awareness, mindful, and then thirdly, once we've got that, we can start to look at what the accountability and responsibility looks like without judging it. These three together allow us to slowly become unstuck from the crisis owning us to a situation where we can start to navigate through the crisis. I hope that helps.
I think that is very helpful. And I really like what you said, Prash, about not having the crisis own you, that you need to take a little perspective on the crisis and not just let it overwhelm you and create a little bit of distance. So I think that's very helpful. And also what you said, that there's no set time. I know with my little mini crisis, it didn't happen. Maybe I needed you, Prash, but it didn't happen in that I got over it in a day or two. It seemed to take the whole damn year. And I had my ups and my downs.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah, but sometimes I think also when you have a severe tragedy, and I know just looking in my own life, and you probably the same thing, losing my mother, for example, that you move on, you get some perspective, but till you fully integrate that can take a good year or more. And you're just need to give your body and yourself time to absorb. And the worst thing I find that you can do when you're in that situation is to berate yourself and say, I must be doing something else. Sometimes you just have to sit with it.
You have to sit with it. And if I may, Wendy, just taking on from what you've just nicely said, let me summarize it for all of you from my perspective and, working with people. Oh my gosh. People in 4 different continents over the past 20 years. So I've seen a thing or two, including my own life, the lives of others. Let me summarize this as 3 S's. The first S is what we described: self-awareness, sitting in with that emotion, leaning into it, identifying where it is in the body, and seeing what that, almost talking to that emotion. What are you here to teach me? Not I'm a victim, I'm suffering, this crisis is happening to me, but what is this teaching me? We reframe our mindset to look at what this is teaching me, even though it feels painful in the moment. But that's the first S, self-awareness. The second S is what you exactly and beautifully said, self-care. We've got to be kind to ourselves. We can't beat ourselves up. We may want to beat ourselves up. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I'm the first guy to beat myself up, but that's not what we need here, folks. Okay, so self-care. Now, self-care doesn't mean binge watching on Netflix. Self-care means looking after our mind, body, and our spirit. Okay? Hang out with people if you can. Hang out with people who cheer you up. Read. Go out for walks in nature. Have a hobby. You might find, well, what the hell is a hobby going to help me when I got a crisis? I'll tell you what it does. It refreshes the parts of our brain and our problem-solving machinery that can help solve the crisis. But if you don't do that self-care, if you don't put that time in for that hobby, that thing, that chat, that time away, then you're not going to be able to overcome your crisis. Everybody needs a refresh. So that's the second, self-care. And then the third S for overcoming a crisis is service. In Sanskrit, we call it seva, the oldest language in the world, 8,000 years old. There is a term called seva, S-E-V-A. Seva means to serve without expectation, to give to others. And listen, folks, we're all serving, whether we're working in an office or whether we're the president of the United States. We are all serving somebody or something. So if we can choose to direct our pain, our suffering during that crisis by serving someone, a cause, a person, a child, a charity, what that does, it shifts our perspective. And again, it allows us to refresh the cognitive, physical, and emotional and spiritual batteries that we have inside us to be able to then attack that crisis with much more power and gusto.
That is a terrific way to end this, Prash. And I think that we're almost over or almost approaching our time. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. I want to thank Prash, who was just fantastic as a guest. And Prash, I think you had some little offer, or not a little offer, a great offer that you wanted to share with people. So if you can quickly do it, and then I'll tell people about our next event and close.
Fantastic, of course, with pleasure, folks. It's always a pleasure. So my service, my seva, my service and my offering to all of you is two things. I have a special meditation, a guided meditation of anyone of any faith or no faith can do based on scientific principles using brainwave technology and the power of guided voice to help to shift you from a state of challenge and crisis to focus, calm, and productivity. I'd like to offer that to you. It's my gift with my compliments. You can grab it from the website Stress to Success. That's the word to stress, T-O, success.co. Charlie Oscar, stresstosuccess.co/gift. So if you go there, I'm sure Wendy and her team will include the link for you afterwards, but stresstosuccess.co/gift. And you can download that meditation. It's 21 minutes of power. And within a week, you'll notice powerful transformations in your waking day. And last but not least, for those of you who are more serious about working through your difficult times, whether it's in your personal life or work, I would be honored to have a conversation with you, a complimentary chat to see if we can work more closely together. It's my gift to you to see how we can help get you through your situation and get you into a more successful state. As I say, it's my company name, Stress to Success, from Stress to Success. So reach out and click in on the link that you'll have here later on for a discovery chat, or connect with me through stresstosuccess.co. And it will be a pleasure to connect with you and have a special session. That'll be 7 sessions that I'm offering. So the first 7, you're very welcome to it. Thank you. Wendy, back to you.
Well, thank you, Prash, for your generous offers. And as I had put on the banner, I'm offering a complimentary storytelling consult with people because, as we said today, it's so important to tell the right story. And in my experience, people, it's easy to maybe tell somebody else's story, but it's very hard to get the messaging correct and get your own stories. So I'm excited about offering that, and feel free to email me. I'll also be putting this in the chat at Wendy@Thriveing@50+plus.com. And I want to thank Prash for being my wonderful guest for my debut show. We will be reconvening a month from now, May 6th at 3 p.m., where we're going to have another special terrific guest. Leslie Jane Seymour, who's the CEO of Covey Club. And before that, she was the editor-in-chief of a number of women's magazines. She has a terrific story to tell about her own reinvention, and I'll be posting information about that. I want to thank everybody. It's been so special to have you here for my debut show. I'm thrilled. And thank everybody. And I'm going to close it now. And I'll put, before I actually end, I'm just going to put in the chat, I'm going to put my email in case anybody needs it. And I will put Prash's website in here too. He has it up here, stress.
At the moment, Wendy, because it's in a private chat, you'll need to tap the message so it shows up on everybody's screen. Right now it's in a, so you just have to tap the message, your email address.
All right, great. Let me just do this right here.
And then everybody will be able to see it.
Yeah, thank you, Prash.
Oh, it's all right. You're welcome. You're doing swimmingly well for your first podcast. People still can't make heads to tails with StreamYard. So I'd say you're thriving, more than thriving.
Well, I have an excellent guest to thrive with. So you made it easy.
It's a pleasure. Each one, reach one, each one, teach one. Together we can make a difference. And that's what this fantastic series of talks is going to do month after month.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the broadcast, and was really great. Thank you again. Thanks,
Take care. Barbara, it's a pleasure. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye for now.